to Waves of YA, a podcast focused on young adult literacy brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Teen Literacy Work Group. My name is Cecilia. I'm one of the Teen Services Librarians at the Toms River Branch. Joining me today, we have...
Kristen, Teen Librarian at the Little Egg Harbor Branch.
Rachel, Teen Librarian at the Manchester Branch.
And hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm from the Waretown Branch.
In today's episode, we will be discussing graphic novels. Not all graphic novels are about superheroes. We will be discussing our favorite graphic novels, what makes a great graphic novel story, and why they are excellent ways to tell stories. Our first question is about representation. What are some great ways that representation has been shown in recent releases?
Recently, I've really seen a uptick in graphic novels showing a lot more of LGBTQ representation. I'm seeing a lot more recognizing how certain discriminations impact the lives of young people. And it's really nice to see all of those things acknowledged. And particularly, I was reading Nubia, the Real One. And it was nice to see her combating certain discrimination issues and going to protest marches, also having LGBTQ representation, also having a discussion of feminism. They touched on a lot of topics in that book, but all in ways that were realistic to a true teen experience.
I'm also finding in a lot of new releases that a lot of LGBTQ topics and also just diverse racially and ethnically are just being worked into books naturally. For example, a recent graphic novel I read is Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell, and that has one of the main characters is Black, or Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker, where one of the main characters is non-binary, and they're just like naturally working them into stories too.
Yeah, I know I recently read Mooncakes, and there was just one time, I think the grandmothers of the main character uses the wrong pronouns, and it's just corrected. And she goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And not a big deal. Just correct pronouns are used throughout the book. And I really like that one too, because the main character also has hearing aids. So diversity and diversibility.
I think that it's way more natural, right? So in a lot of the newer graphic novels that I'm seeing, if it's LGBT characters, that's not the character's entire identity, or like the book is not about this particular part of the identity. It's just natural because that's how people are. People have multiple things that are important and salient to who they are. And like, I'm thinking right now about Heartstopper. It's just like, this is just like life. And I appreciate that as a person who goes out and lives life also in like complex ways, that it's not the sole part of the story. All of those things are important. I just finished Other Boys by Damien Alexander. It's a biography. And at the end of it, he talks about, I didn't want this to only be about me being gay, or only about me being bullied, or only about my mother having died. All of those things were important to the story of my childhood, right? So when I think about representation, it's not just having the identity represented, it's having multiple identities represented in a natural way. And I think that that's something that new graphic novels are really getting right.
Absolutely. I agree, because it can be sometimes a little bit painful to see the kind of tokenism or forced diversity when it like really is just the focus of the story. And sometimes those stories are important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like I read Cheer Up, and I cried, honestly, at the trans representation in that book, just because it was so nice to see trans girl representation. But that being said, I also like stories where a trans girl can just be a trans girl, and the entire story doesn't have to be about that.
I'm glad you said that, Sarah, because I also cried when I read that. And it's so short too. Says it's just like I read it in like one sitting too. It felt like very magazine like how thin it was too.
It was a fast read, but I think it was important because that's the one group that I still think we're seeking more representation is with different gender identities. And I am seeing more of that, and I'm so happy to see more of that. And I hope that we continue to see even more and more positive lights.
Yeah, I've been noticing a lot recently, a lot of nonfiction graphic novels have been coming out. Like George Takei's They Called Us Enemies, about his experience as a child in the Japanese internment camps. So there's been a lot of like nonfiction. I think it's easier for kids to digest, I think, nonfiction books as graphic novels and like biographies too.
It's easier for me to digest. I love
Yes.
it.
Everyone to digest.
Yeah.
I've also been noticing that a lot of classic books are also getting republished as graphic novels now, too. And that's the same thing. It's a lot easier for teens to digest, like reading The Scarlet Letter or Frankenstein or Les Miserables, when it's a graphic novel over a thick, wordy book.
Me too. Like that one, definitely me too, because I was not the kind of person that was like, yay, classic novels. I'm still not that person, but give me it in a graphic novel format. And I was like, okay, this is worth the read. And then I might be more interested in reading the actual classic novel, right?
Right. I actually recently read The Kite Runner, the graphic novel form, because I heard such great things about it and people love it so much. And I was actually really glad that I read the graphic novel. It didn't take too much time for me to read it, but I honestly didn't like it that much. So now I'm kind of glad I didn't spend the time reading the whole novel.
It can give you a good grasp of the story and a quicker and easier to read. And I think also what would be useful for this, especially when we're talking about classics, we're talking about books that sometimes have language use that we don't use. It is unfamiliar to modern language use. So whether that be Shakespearean or English, or we're talking about 1800s writing, regardless, it can be different and foreign. And I think the context clues of the drawings and everything like that can really bring that story to life. And that can make it, as we said, much more digestible, but also it can increase the understanding of the material so much more.
Yeah, I think like not just classics a lot have been redone. I know like Jason Reynolds' Long Way Down was adapted into a graphic novel.
Graceling just came out as a graphic novel, and Fangirl, which is a different Rainbow Rowell, that one also turned into a graphic novel.
And Speak, I think, too, right?
Yeah, Speak, absolutely, yeah.
Those are like modern classics, I think I would call them.
So we were talking about graphic novels and how they can make classics more digestible. And we're all such fans, but this is still a debate, unfortunately, decades later. But why do we think that graphic novels are a valid source for reading? I know that this is something we have to sometimes have discussions with other people about. So I want to hear what you ladies think.
I think they're really good for people who have trouble visualizing, because you could see the expressions of the characters on the page, their body language, quote unquote. They're really good for people that are learning a language for the first time as well, because you can, if you don't know the language, you could see like the expressions of the characters as well. So I think they're excellent for those visual cues that they represent as well. You're getting more than the language. You're getting like the visual representation of the characters and how they're experiencing everything and their emotions and their feelings.
Yeah, so like social emotional learning.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I feel like my brain does something different when I'm reading a graphic novel. And I have no statistics to back this up, but like the experience of reading a graphic novel is different. And I feel like it's like a multi-sense experience. And so I can feel my brain working different ways. And so engaging in the story in other ways. And I think that that's really powerful. So I 100% can believe that graphic novels are wonderful for people learning languages, wonderful for people who engage more with visual than written. And I know that it does something different. So like I can't understand how they wouldn't be valid. Like I get the story and I get like both. It's like story plus. Like I got the story plus a little bit of bonus.
Yeah, like you said, your brain is overworking because you're not just interpreting the dialogue, you're interpreting the characters' like visual actions on the page too.
Huh?
It's like
And sometimes the
your
way
brain
that
is
the
working overtime.
yes, or even the way that the panels interact with each other or the pages interact with each other. Because if you're paying attention, when I'm reading a book that's just words, my brain is reading words and comprehending words, and it's doing that work. But when I'm reading a graphic novel, my brain is comprehending words and understanding words, but it's also looking at the panel with the illustration, but it's also looking at the neighboring panels and how they relate together. And when you have the full book open, it's interacting with both pages together. You're doing a lot more. I don't know if it's analytical work or synthesizing. You're putting all these different pieces together and making one cohesive thing.
And I think it takes a lot to figure out the format of how you want to put the characters on the page. The same thing as if you were watching a movie, like why is that character positioned over here? Why did they do a full spread page of this one scene as opposed to, doing the single panels? There's just a lot more, I think, going on. And I think it is valid, like reading comprehension as well.
It definitely is, because the same factors are there that are in a novel, just a text novel. It helps increase vocabulary. There's still character development. There's still stories. There's still plot. And as you said, there's even more to analyze, because you don't have to just analyze, find where the climax is. That's still there. Find the rising action. That's still there. But what's also there, like you said, in the way that the panels interact, or something that I found interesting when I was reading Nubia recently, was occasionally they would change the colors and the hues and the drawing styles. They would flip between different ones on the page, and I'd be like thinking, what is this drawing style trying to communicate to me about, this character's mental state or this situation? There's red, there's things closing in on the sides. It feels frantic. It feels panicked. So there's so much more communicated there on top of just what's already in a story.
I would just add that in the same way that we talked about graphic novels as like an in to some of the classics or modern classics, for reluctant readers, graphic novels are an in to reading in general. I think that they are valuable for a number of reasons, but when I can see a child or a teen come in and be excited about a book, they're more likely to be excited about the next book too.
Yeah, I do agree with that too. I think graphic novels are great for reluctant readers. If there's, you hand somebody a book filled with colorful pictures, I think, reluctant readers are much more likely to read that than a thick 700-page novel with tiny print that's going to take them a year to read. So I do think graphic novels are great for reluctant readers. And I think if they love reading graphic novels, then maybe they'll start reading, regular novels too.
Absolutely. And I don't think anybody should close themselves off to one form of art or another. Obviously, you can have preferences, but such wonderful art comes in so many different mediums. Mm-hmm. Such wonderful stories come in so many different mediums. And I just want to be able to enjoy them all.
Sometimes graphic novels are worked on by the illustrator and the writer, and they're not always the same person. So you're getting them working together on the story, and then sometimes two different perspectives of the same story. Like, why was this color used here? Or why were these words used? Why was, this part capitalized and this part like very small? So there's, like we said, there's so much to analyze. And I always feel like I read graphic novels faster than I read prose books. Speaking of like 700 plus words, Tilly Walden has a book called On a Sunbeam, which is a super meaty book. I think it's got to be at least 400 pages, but it's also this sounds very strange, but it's a very quiet read because not a lot of the characters speak in it, and her illustrations and the way she uses colors in it is so interesting and fascinating.
Art or story, which matters more when picking your graphic novel reads? I think I can start this one off. I kind of took that question in a direction with what initially attracts me to a graphic novel, and I say the art definitely does. Because metaphorically, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but when you're a librarian, you definitely judge books by their cover.
100%.
So when I'm scanning the graphic novel shelves, the art I see on the front cover, and then I open up and look at a few pages and I see beautiful artwork, that's initially what makes me open up to the front panel of the book and read what the book is about. So if I see art that just isn't appealing to me, then I do kind of assume that I'm not going to like the story either. So I might give it a chance and like start reading it. If it's not for me, then I'll put it down. But the art is initially what attracts me to the book.
Yeah, I've definitely read series, and sometimes like the Runaway series, and sometimes they'll have different artists that do certain arcs or story arcs. And sometimes if I don't like the artist, I'll be like, I'll skip this story arc and wait till the pictures get better, like more my style.
I would say definitely a same thing. I pick it by the artwork. Sometimes if I browse online, then I can pick by story, but definitely on the shelves, it's picked by artwork. I would say there are definitely stories out there, though, that kind of exceed this. There are stories that speak so loud for themselves that they can carry themselves over what might be considered to be kind of very basic or very rough art. But it definitely is the eye-catchingness of a cover. So if you're trying to make a name for yourself, and then, yeah, the art really does matter. It is what gets you off of the shelf in the first place.
I would also agree. The story is important. So when I'm looking for a new book to read, I am going to look at the artwork first because that's right on the cover. And I definitely judge books by their covers because sometimes they don't match up to the story. And then I feel like I was tricked. But I guess it got me in to the story. So that's still good. Even if the artwork is the style that I like fully saturated, bold colors. I really like Raina Telgemeier's artwork. I know that different people have their different kinds of artwork, but it also ends up lining up with the kinds of stories that I like. So I like stories that are about real people doing real things. So they're like contemporary fiction, and those are what I gravitate towards. And it happens that the artistic style usually ends up lining up with that.
There is this one, is it Mariko Tamaki? I love the art, but every time I keep picking up her stuff, but every time I'm like, not really digging this story, but I keep picking up her stuff because like she always picks really great artists for all her works. And I can't trick myself into not reading one of her things. Some graphic novels have a very particular style to them. Like I know Tilly Walden's books have a very particular style that's not very it's unusual. Umbrella Academy, the artist for that, Gabriel Ba. Not sure if I'm saying the last name right, but he has a very unusual, very angular style to his work, which I wasn't really a fan of, but I really enjoyed the storytelling in Umbrella Academy. We used to have a graphic novel club in Toms River, and this was just when the TV show was coming out. And I was showing the teens the art, and they were like, we don't want to read this because the art, they were saying like the art was so ugly. I was like, just give it a second. And they like super got into the story and like checked it all out on Hoopla after the club. So sometimes the art isn't the only thing you should be looking at too.
Right. It's not a deal breaker, but it might be something to reel you in. So if you like it, great, go with the story. But if you don't like it, it shouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker because the story in there might be more than meets the eye.
Absolutely. Or, sometimes it's the other way around. I read a book recently that I was really expecting to like. It was highly recommended. The art style, beautiful, gorgeous. I even thought it was an original idea. But by the end, I really wasn't in love with the story. And it was such a shame because I still devoured the entire thing because I loved the art style and it was so engaging. But if they made like a second or a follow-up to it, it wasn't going to be worth it to me to read that. So while the art style might get you in, it's not going to keep you to stay. It's the story that's going to keep you to stay.
So, do any of you have a graphic novel that you've read recently that had a very unusual art style? And how did that impact the reading experience for you?
I don't know if it's not one that I read recently. Strong Female Protagonist by Brennan Lee Mulligan and Molly Ostertag. It was a webcomic. Brennan did the writing and Molly did the illustrations, and it was her first book, I believe, it was a webcomic that they eventually got published. And from the first volume to the second volume, and then going back and looking at all her most recent book, The Girl from the Sea, and just seeing how her art style has changed was really eye-opening. Because they started off doing black and white, and her lines weren't as dark, and it felt a little bit grungy. The story was kind of a little bit grungy too. It's about basically if superheroes were real, and a retired superhero that retired a little bit too early in her career to go to college and be a philosophy major. But yeah, it was really interesting seeing how her art style has changed and the similarities sort of in her art style, and picking up things of, well, this is definitely, Molly Ostertag's work because it has A, B, and C in it, stylized. Her faces are sort of similar. The eyes are sort of had a certain way to it. Has anybody ever read a book particularly for an illustrator just because you love them so much?
I can't say that I have, although I did read Ostertag's The Girl from the Sea and loved it. And I know, Kristen, that you had said that you read that one as well. And she definitely does have that distinct style that you were referring to. You mentioned a webcomic, and that made me think of, they're technically considered adult books, but the Lore Olympus webcomic that's finally been published and bound and everything. So that was interesting because I also read it as a webcomic. And seeing it now in a book format, it's just different because you were reading it on your phone, and certain things like her hair, for example, would cascade down the screen. And it was interesting to see how they transferred that to the print. And I can't honestly tell you if I like it better or not. I think for me, at least, because I originally read it in the webcomic format, I feel like part of it is lost. And that way I liked the unusualness. I liked the webcomicness of it. And unfortunately, I don't think that could be properly carried over into a print form.
Yeah, I think webcomics are super popular now, especially there's been a bunch that have been published. I know Check Please was on Tumblr before it was on our YA shelves. There's lots of other ones that I can't think of off the top of my head.
Hyperbole and a Half. That one, I think, started as a webcomic, and it's Allie Brosh, the girl that's I want all the things, with the little spiky blonde hair. But that was webcomic. I feel like that one did translate well to a printed book.
I think Heartstopper was a webcomic before it was a book. And I think that's a great way for people to get noticed too. Nimona by Andy Stevenson.
I like that artwork. Yes, that one's good.
Yeah.
Nimona. I like Nimona's story too, though.
Yes.
It's like the SoundCloud now. You're a SoundCloud artist. Now you can be a webcomic artist. And then one day, keep working hard. It'll happen.
Yeah, I'm looking at a list now of all the webcomics that are now. And some of them are that was a webcomic. But yeah, they're super accessible. They're kind of, was the app called Webtoon? Yeah, so they're super accessible. I know I see the teens reading them all the time and talking about them, and some librarians even are hooked in.
That's me.
Yeah, anybody else have anything that popped out to you recently?
I read My Body in Pieces. It's Marie Noelle Hebert. I believe it's translated. I think she's French. And the artwork is not what I would want if I was picking a graphic novel, but it worked really well for the book. It's much more artistic, painterly. It's really dark. and sketchy in some place, like not sketchy like weird, but like sketchy like a sketch. And that one was definitely very striking. The artwork could have been artwork that you found in a museum or on someone's wall, but it was an entire book of artwork, which I think is incredible.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, it's not necessarily unusual, but I wanted to mention a graphic novel I read called This One Summer. And the illustrations throughout the entire book only use the colors purple and white. And it does have to go along with the tone and the emotions of the book. And I do understand the illustrator's reasonings for wanting to only use a couple colors, but that only using a couple colors just doesn't appeal to me. And it's just a personal preference to me. I just prefer artwork that's more colorful and like uses full color as opposed to something that only uses purple and white. It's not as fun for me to look at. I don't know.
I was just going to say, I understand. I can't say that I am the same way. I think just because of my years reading manga or something like that, like black and white color, it doesn't matter. I'm ready to eat it up. But what does often discourage me is when I open up a graphic novel and it has a massive amount of text on every page. That really puts me off. But I know some people really don't mind that, or in fact, actually really like that.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way as you, Sarah. Like when there are like text blocks of like lengthy conversations, sometimes that is off-putting, but sometimes it works with the story depending on what the scene is, or if they're like over-analyzing something in the scene or explaining something. It really depends on how the artist and the storyteller are formatting the book as well. Because you can format the different word bubbles to go into different places. And that, I think that does something with your mind, depending on where it is in the panel. If it's straight in the middle and it's a close up on the character's face, or if it's a wide shot and, you know, you have it off to the side in one of the corners or like down at the bottom. I think your brain probably, I don't know for sure. I'm not a scientist or claim to be one, but I think that, you know, depending on where it is, your eyes like definitely do something.
I don't know if anyone else is getting to a certain point in their eye health that sometimes I'll get a graphic novel in print and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. The writing is very small and sometimes I find myself really struggling to read them. And so I've really been appreciative of e-graphic novels because I can adjust the size and adjust where I am and not have to play that game of like, do I leave my glasses on and it's blurry or do I take my glasses off and I have to put it really close? I don't know. So definitely everything. It's weird because like type is still important in a traditional book, but like the style of the like do they use type or is the illustrator illustrating the actual words? It ends up mattering. Every decision, including where those text bubbles are and how much is in them and how small it is and does it have serifs or no serifs, like all of those things end up being really important. And just thinking about that gives me a little bit of anxiety because I'm like, how many decisions did it take to make this book?
We had a program a couple years ago. Is it a couple years? I don't know anymore.
Time doesn't exist.
Maybe it was a couple. I don't know. Anyway,
it's just a construct.
With Sam Maggs, who was explaining, because she writes for video games and she writes for graphic novels, and explaining like the process behind writing for graphic novels versus writing for video games versus writing for books. And it definitely is a process. Like you have to think about more like, what do you want on this panel versus what you want on the next panel, and like the sequence of things and how you want, I want this character to be wearing this color and this character to be standing this way and this one to be doing that. And if you're working with someone else, you just add like another person involved in the process, and then you have to send it to the editor. Their brains are working overtime as well as ours reading everything too.
I believe it.
All right, so the next question is, would the story in graphic novels be as meaningful if not written in this form, such as if it was written in prose? I know we talked a little bit about stories that have been adapted into graphic novels.
I think that a lot is lost. The stories are always wonderful, but you would have to have a lot of prose. I don't think it's not manageable, but you would have to have a lot of prose to carry over the different emotions that are expressed by one character's facial expression, or like Rachel said about that one book she was reading with just using the one or two colors, like the feeling, the mood that was set just by that artistic decision. So much more prose has to happen to get that same effect when it is so easily done in such a short period of time with a graphic novel. So I do feel like a lot would be lost.
I do agree with that. I think a great example in a book I read, I think I mentioned before, was Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell. In that book, the two main characters are working in a pumpkin patch, and they're kind of spending the whole night running around the pumpkin patch. And it, like, part of the artwork is like showing a map, showing where they're running around this pumpkin patch. So I do think in order to put that into prose, it wouldn't be as funny or like as appealing. Because what was kind of funny and cute about the story is seeing the map of where they are in this place, and just describing it in prose, it just wouldn't translate well, I don't think.
Yeah, I love that one. Yeah, sometimes I would flip back to the map. The map had places they didn't go to as well on there. So like the possibilities and whatnot. You get different things from a prose novel that you would get from a graphic novel and vice versa. I think when you're reading a prose novel, if it's in first person or third person, you're getting their emotional standpoint. It's kind of, besides thought bubbles, you can't really get like the emotional aspect, I feel sometimes, but you do get the body language and the facial expressions and the stance, because you can't describe where every character is standing in a scene. Like sometimes you'll get background characters in a graphic novel that'll show up later. I know some artists do little in-jokes and put their family and friends in the background, or different characters, or little nods to different things. So that's something you get in a graphic novel that you probably wouldn't get in a prose novel. And just like the art style and the visual representation that you get in graphic novels. But I definitely think you get more into the character's mindset when you read a prose novel, as opposed to the graphic novel. Graphic novels are more like you're watching the story unfold and comprehending it. The prose is more of like, I feel like, emotional resource. I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's more immersive into their stream of consciousness, into the narrators, or if it's third person, the main protagonist stream of consciousness. While you have to kind of discern that more with the graphic novel, it's much more top down.
So you guys were talking about Pumpkinheads, and I feel like I had a totally different experience because I like Pumpkinheads and I love Rainbow Rowell's books in general, like all of them. And I finished it and I was like, I need more. Like, not having the internal monologues and like the feelings of the characters, or like misinterpretations of what each other's deals were. I missed that. And I was like, I kind of want this to be in prose, but then the opposite happens sometimes. So you have Laurie Halse Anderson's Speak was originally prose and then adapted to graphic novel. And maybe it's because I've read both that I felt like I already had all that emotional, I almost called it emotional baggage, all that emotional stuff. Like I already had that. And then I go into the graphic novel and I'm like, oh, this is so powerful to see it. But I guess that's not a fair comparison because I saw both and I had that context. But definitely when I sometimes, especially if it's a very fast read, I get to the end of a graphic novel and I'm like, I would like to know more. Please do not. Yeah, like please more.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes people get upset with adaptations. They say, oh, that's not how I imagined that character to be in my head. The same thing you get when you turn something into a movie. People's imaginations of how certain things were are kind of then forced into what the original artist's expectations were. So some people are less happy with that. Sometimes people are pleasantly surprised. About this a little bit before. If a story isn't great, can the art elevate it beyond that level, or vice versa? If the story is really, really good, but the art isn't, does that do the book a disservice? And this is kind of more along the lines of the judging the book by the cover thing that we were touching upon.
Yeah, I think one example I can give that I recently read that I think, let me see who read it too. I think Sarah, you also read Squad.
Yes, that was the book. I didn't want to like call it out, but that was the book I was talking about before when I was like, I read the whole thing, but I wasn't super stoked by the time I finished.
The artwork is beautiful, but the story has a beginning, middle, and end, but I feel like it was missing something. I don't know what it is, but
it was so rushed, and it definitely, I think it had a cool premise, but
yes,
that really rushed romance, and none of the emotions, the characters felt genuine to me at the end, because I just felt like we had barreled through everything. I just didn't feel any attachments or anything like that. But that being said, like you said, art style, wonderful. And that's what got me reading it, but I was disappointed.
Yeah, I think the art style definitely, like, if you're rating a book, I think it pushes it up a little bit. Well, you're like, well, that didn't really hit all the marks for me story-wise, but, you know, in this panel, when this happened, or, you know, seeing this visually happen, I think it can elevate it a little bit. There's another one that I think I talked about it a little bit when we were preparing Grimoire Noir. The art in that is like mind-bogglingly beautiful, but the story is very similar to Squad where it feels like a little bit like I want something more. Like I feel like I needed more information. I wanted more from it, which I guess can be good in some regards. Like the same thing with Squad, certain things that happen. I was like, why did that happen? I would like to know more about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the other hand, there are things like this had a beautiful, great art style, Lifetime Passes by Terry Blass.
I love that one.
I loved it, but judging by the cover, I looked at it because I'd ordered it based off of the story alone. I was doing some online browsing, and when the cover came in, I was like, oh, this looks really cartoonish. I don't think I'm going to like it, but I loved it. Absolutely. Story, art, everything beautiful. Completely recommend. So
that was another one I cried.
Yeah. Me too. If it doesn't make me cry, like really, what is it doing?
Yeah, that one had a very interesting premise of these group of teens that are obsessed with this theme park that kind of reflects a certain popular theme park in California. And they find out that if someone dies at the park, they'll get lifetime passes. So the one character, her aunt works at a nursing home, so they decide to start for like nefarious purposes this program where they take seniors into the parks, hoping that something will happen and they will get lifetime passes to the park. But it turns into this like very like heartwarming story of like the different characters. It like discusses toxic friendships and whatnot. It was just really good.
I literally need that book.
It's on Hoopla, so
like yesterday. That's funny. Love it.
It really has like a lot of dark humor in there. And like as I was describing it to someone else, I was like, this sounds a little weird.
I mean, it does, but it's like if you're the person that speaks to, I can see as you're describing the graphic novel, I'm like, yeah, that's a little morbid. I'm like, I need it. Like
yesterday.
Thinking of, though, things that like the art style really changes things for me. I'm not generally a comic book type graphic novel person, even though like I want to love the story. I love the stories and I really want to get into them, but a lot of them are very like that text heaviness that I mentioned before. That's a big turnoff for me. I find that in a lot of the comic book style graphic novels. And because of that, I have a big difficulty getting through them, even though I'm interested in the story. What really turned that around for me was the Teen Titans by Kami Garcia, the Raven, the Beast Boy, and then the Beast Boy and Raven books. Those graphic novels, the art style and the story, both of them were really compelling. But I think it really was the art style that got me into it and got me keep reading it, even though they are technically comic book characters, but it wasn't exactly in that traditional comic book style that you see.
I feel very similarly. Like sometimes I'm not sure if I should talk about graphic novels because I'm not a superhero person. So your traditional DC and Marvel comic books are just like not, it doesn't speak to me. But Teen Titans, the Beast Boy and Raven, Kami Garcia and her illustrator, I don't remember who the illustrator
Gabriel Piccolo.
was. Yes. That was fabulous. And I was at Comic-Con and did hear Kami talking about how they paired up and all of those things. And it doesn't always work as smoothly as it does, but I feel like Teen Titans did it. Also, same situation, superhero, Whistle.
I love that one.
Yes, like loved it, but I don't usually like superhero origin stories or like any of those kinds of things. But Whistle, it's a new Gotham hero by E. Lockhart, and that one also did it for me, where the art, and I thought that everything was not going to hit, but put together, I was like, okay, maybe I should read some superhero comic book kind of stuff.
Well, that's so funny that you guys mentioned those. Those are all written by pre-established YA authors too. I wonder if that's the storytelling reason and like pairing up, because I know Rainbow Rowell has done a couple arcs with the Runaways. We're seeing a lot of YA authors doing like superhero graphic novels. Maureen Gu just came out with one. I hope to have it done today, but I was reading it right before this. Silk, which is like a Spider-Man Asian American hero, Cindy Moon, who was also bitten by a radioactive spider, the same one that Peter Parker was bitten with, but she was like locked in a bunker for like 10 years. So she has like a new interpretation of the character that has already been pre-established. And I think most of those that we've mentioned, except Whistle, I think Whistle's a new character, are reinterpretations of characters that already exist in the lexicon, but they're done through the lens of a YA author as well. They have more of that graphic novel feel as opposed to like an issue by issue comic book feel.
Right. And then we have YA authors that are writing prose books based on comics. Right. So you've got Julie Murphy doing Faith, and Marie Lu has a bunch. And I've never tried any of those, but
the DC Icons ones.
Yeah.
But then the DC Icons prose books get turned into graphic novels.
Right. So like then it comes full circle.
Yeah, because they did the Catwoman one, and I think the Bat one became graphic novels. And I feel like maybe there's a Black Canary one somewhere out there in the world, but I can't remember if it's the graphic novel or if it's prose.
That is something that I have to say, though, that I do love about comic books. It makes me wish that I could get into them more, that being the evolving nature of them. Like, there's no set story of Batman. There's no set story of Superman. There's no set story of Beast Boy. There's the general basic bones of the story that makes the story, that makes the character, but anybody can take it and put their own twist on it. And you can have this version that you like better, this version that you like better, or you can like the beginning of this version and the ending of this version, or you can like all of them. And I really like that because it just gives a wide amount of adaptability and the ability for people to take these really familiar, nostalgic characters and then make them into something new for this decade.
Yeah, I love the playing with canon. It's really exciting to see something different from a character that you know, but now the backstory is slightly different, but you know who it is. It's like fan fiction, but it's professional.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you caught this, Kristen, but Beast Boy does make an appearance in Whistle.
I did.
Yeah.
It was so interesting because I had seen them both together talking about their graphic novels. And so I'm immediately putting them on hold while I'm in the audience. And then I get them and I was like, oh, they're like kind of related.
Yeah. And I always like when someone does like a different take or like puts topics that have come up more in recent years, like before Beast Boy hit the shelves, I think I got an arc of it, and I really liked, there was a lot of talk about body image, and like male body image doesn't get talked a lot about in literature. And I really like, you know, the shape-shifting character talking about body image. Who better than to do that?
Oh, I'm just looking at our list, and the Oracle Code is another one that I didn't think I'd like it. I read about what the story was, right? And then I got the book and I was like, oh, this is superhero stuff. And then I read it and I was like, okay, yeah, this is actually really fabulous.
I read the Oracle Code too, and the only reason I read it was because somebody recommended it to me and said that it was really good. And I think like the main character is like, she's in the Batman storyline, I think.
Yes.
And okay, good. And I like know nothing about Batman. He's just a superhero that doesn't appeal to me at all. So I kind of read that book kind of with like a blank slate of mind, not knowing at all who this character is, what her backstory is. And I enjoyed it a lot. And I think, you know, I may not read more Batman comics, but I think if there was like a sequel to that book, I would definitely read it.
No, that's one I got to put on my list. That sounds super interesting.
Another YA author writing a.
Yes, I looked at it. I was like, oh, yes.
Chilia, stop calling me out like this.
We have a type, I think.
Yeah.
I think the publishing industry has a type as of right now of just recruiting the Avengers of YA authors to write all their like graphic novel series.
It's
like,
true.
Especially DC. I think DC has started it, and I think Marvel's doing it a little bit more with Maureen Gu writing the Silk series. Jason Reynolds wrote a Miles Morales book.
Yes.
I think the YA authors have more of an insight in like the teen brain, whereas I think, you know, the graphic novel writers are usually have the more action-oriented brain. So like bringing that emotional standpoint into the graphic novels, which is like a lot of the ones we talked about today have, you know, strong emotional builds to them. And I think superhero ones tend to be all about the action and the mystery, and they haven't really focused in on like, you know, what happens when you're a teen superhero and you have to like do a homework assignment or like, you know, you have to go on a date or whatever. I think that's why not a YA author that has written a comic book, I don't believe, unless I'm wrong. The Miss Marvel series was like super, super popular, and now she's getting her own show on Disney Plus because it had that emotional background.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking for that, definitely, I know I've said it like 3 times before, but Nubia, Real One, I think really, I think that's essentially what it's about. And that's McKinney and a Robin Smith and
another YA author. I'm going to just keep calling them out as we're talking about them.
And yeah, same thing though. She talks about, you know, having superhero powers and having to deal with real life teen problems in an intersectional light. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm excited for like, I'm sure there's more plated, you know, out there of different superheroes being reimagined by YA authors or other people.
What do you think the best genres to read in graphic novel form are?
Chilia, I want to hear about that mystery book you said was a graphic novel the other day, because I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Yes, Tara O'Connor wrote, she's a New Jersey native. The
Yeah.
graphic novel takes place in New Jersey. It's called Fly by Night. I knew she had a book coming up, but like this was like 2 years ago since I read her last one. Yes, so the last one I read from Tara O'Connor was The Altered History of Willow Sparks. And that was kind of like a magical realism one. So I knew she had another one coming out, and I just really liked her art style, and I really liked the story of the other one. And I just found this. I wasn't waiting for it for anything because it takes a while for graphic novels and like most books to get published. So I just saw it on the cart, I recognized the name, and just immediately took it out. It's called Fly by Night. The main character moves back home after her parents get divorced. She ends up going to live with her father, and her twin sister lives with the mom. So she moves back to her mom's after her twin sister goes missing. And she's moving back to the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. And if anybody knows anything about the Pine Barrens,
Jersey Devil.
Yeah, the Jersey Devil does make an appearance in the book, and it is kind of a twist on the character. And I really enjoyed it because it had that mystery aspect. The main character is looking for her twin sister, what exactly happened. There's some weird New Jersey stuff that happens in the book, like some sites that they go to that I like recognize as weird New Jersey sites. And yeah, so it has that mystery aspect, and then it has the supernatural aspect. I really like reading supernatural books in graphic novels, or something that has a mystery element to it, because I feel like it builds the suspense. And you can really see the last few books I've read recently were werewolves books. So I've read Squad, and the last one I read was Artie and the Wolf Moon, which is the main character realizes she comes from a family of werewolves. The main character is also Black, so it's a Black werewolf character. And she finds out there's this whole town full of werewolves that her mom came from. And then she finds out all different things about werewolf society and the supernatural world, and a little bit about her father who has passed away and what his whole deal was and their backstory. And I love seeing the transformation, and like her eyes glowing red in the book, and like all the other characters, you can get hints in the background. Like at one point she likes to do photography. So she's in like a dark room, and then you see a shadow behind her, like creeping up because she doesn't know that it's there. This is going to sound weird. That one was super cute for being about werewolves. And it was like randomly gay too. So I love when that happens.
Love that. That's super funny because honestly, I love supernatural stories, and you really have to kind of chain me down to get ready to get to read anything that isn't supernatural or fantasy or sci-fi when it comes to actual prose or textbooks. But when it comes to graphic novels, I don't think I was doing this on purpose at all, but I'm looking through what I've read recently, just in the past 4 or 5 months. And there's a lot of contemplative real life stories. And I think I'm just more accessible and open to them because they are in graphic novel format. For example, I read Himawari House by Harmony Becker, and that was really quiet and contemplative and talked about diaspora and that feeling of being a stranger in 2 different places, and other just real life modern day fiction that I generally avoid when it comes to print, but for some reason I'm drawn to when it comes to graphic novels. So I do wonder why that is. I don't have an answer. I just wonder.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I'm more drawn to like the fantasy, sci-fi, and the supernatural stuff, graphic novels. And then in prose, I'm like, where's my romance? Where's my romantic comedies and realistic fiction? So yeah, I wonder if it's the draw of the colors and like visually seeing everything. One of my favorites, which was a webtoon, I forgot it was a webtoon until just now, Cosmo Nights by, I think it's Hannah Templer, which is very sci-fi, very like strong female characters. And it's like mech fighting in space rescuing princesses. There's a squad of women that are rescuing princesses in this mech fighting so they don't have to marry the people they're betrothed, whoever wins the fight. So they win the fight so the princesses can be free. So it's like this rebellion sort of story. It's really awesome.
I really like nonfiction in graphic novel format. When I look at the graphic novels that I choose, if it's a biography, if it's nonfiction, I'm all about it, even if the subject is not something that I'm actually super interested in. One of the ones that I've read recently that is hefty, let me just emphasize that this is a hefty book, because I guess the paper that they use to print graphic novel books is heavy, and this one's like 500 pages. Dragon Hoops by Jean Yang. I do not care about sports. If you said, let's go watch a basketball game, action, adventure, concession stands, I'd be like, can we do something different than that? This is history of basketball. There was information about how the game is played and things that I would never necessarily seek out. But as a graphic novel, it worked and it was really fun. I enjoyed that. So if I can find it in graphic novel format, I will read basically any nonfiction book as a graphic novel.
I do agree that I do prefer to read nonfiction as graphic novels more than as regular novels. One nonfiction graphic novel that I read recently was called Brazen: Rebel Ladies Who Rock the World. And it's just 29 really short comic biographies about different women who somehow they had an impact on society, whether they be doctors or politicians or scientists or actresses or musicians. They're just really short biographies, and they're really easy to read, and some of them were funny and some of them were sad. And when you read the whole book, then you had just met 29 new people. And I feel like now I have like really cool fun facts to like give out to people.
Yeah, like now I learned something in addition to getting to enjoy this book that is well illustrated and well told, but I also actually learned something, and then I'm more likely to seek out more information.
Yeah, when I read like a nonfiction book, I do find myself like going onto databases and onto the internet and trying to find like the full story or more information about it. And then if I can like work that into conversations, I'll be like, oh, well, did you know this about this person? Yeah, I read that in a book once.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a trend. I forgot the word for trend for a hot second, going on about graphic novel memoirs. I think we've been seeing a lot of those recently. Some of the ones we mentioned today too. I think it's just easier to sometimes tell a story with pictures and words as opposed to just, this is what happened to me. Sometimes, writing down exactly what happened and seeing it for yourselves too, like the visual representation of this is happening or this person did this, and seeing how they did it in a visual standpoint as opposed to just telling. Show and tell is basically graphic novel nonfiction.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events on our website's calendar of events page. All titles mentioned in today's episode can be found through the Ocean County Library free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.